So this is one of those situations where I don't think this movie really needed a sequel, but considering how much of a surprise that first movie was, hey, let's see what the sequel has to offer. Happy Death Day to You is the sequel to 2017's Happy Death Day from Blumhouse Productions, and doesn't take place that long after the events of the first movie. It once again follows Tree, played by Jessica Rothe, as her now boyfriend's roommate starts reliving the same day over and over, and the day keeps getting reset whenever he gets killed by a guy in a baby face mask. And since she's obviously dealt with this situation beforehand, she helps get right down to it and figure out how to stop all this. And then something happens, I'm not going to go into detail about it, where she herself ends up back in the events of the first movie on her birthday, reliving the same day over and over again until she gets killed. So it pretty much pulls a Back to the Future Part 2, where we go back to the events of the first movie and see it all from a different perspective with some changes here and there. And this movie even references Back to the Future too. So, yeah. So like I mentioned before, the first Happy Death Day was a huge surprise. I didn't think much of it going into it. I thought it was just going to be another generic slasher movie from Blumhouse, but it ended up being so much more clever than that. It not only was a horror movie, but it was more of a horror comedy than anything, or I guess I should say comedy horror, because it's more of a comedy than it is a horror movie. It's sort of like the horror movie equivalent to Groundhog Day, and the movie even admits that, so you really can't blame them for ripping off Groundhog Day when they're fully aware of it. So yeah, it was a surprise, and along with Get Out, it made me more excited to see what else Blumhouse had to offer in terms of film. So with the sequel, I really thought to myself, what could they possibly do with this to make it different from the first one? And they actually do something to make it different than the first Happy Death Day, to kind of expand things a bit, for better and for worse. And the one thing that I'm specifically talking about with this movie that separates it from the first one is that they actually give an explanation for why all this stuff is happening. Because in the first movie, much like with Groundhog Day, you didn't really get an explanation on why the day kept resetting. It just was a magic, fantastical thing. No explanation needed. And when you finally get to this movie and they explain it all, it's pretty much science. Yeah, this movie bears a lot of similarities to Back to the Future Part 2. And as I mentioned beforehand, they even reference that movie in this movie, because it deals with a lot of alternate timelines, time travel itself, parallel dimensions. I mean, this movie gets into the realm of parallel dimensions and alternate universes so often, and it's just so out there for this kind of movie, that if Doctor Strange just popped up at random, I would have been like, okay, that makes total sense, I guess. So yeah, it's a neat way to make this different from the first one. At the same time, it does demystify that first movie. One thing that kind of surprised me going into this is that it's not a horror movie at all. The first movie did have elements of horror, but was mostly a comedy. This one is a straight-out comedy. And there are some points in this movie where it goes into total slapstick territory. It's so goofy. It has some clever jokes here and there are a handful of times where I did laugh. But it really took me by surprise that this wasn't a horror movie at all, considering that, again, it's Blumhouse and that's their specialty. But hey, I always like it when a studio or producer decide to make a different kind of movie than what they usually make. So it's a nice change of pace. Now, it sounds like I'm criticizing this movie more than praising it, but I actually really like this movie in the end. I don't think it's as good or as clever as the first Happy Death Day, but what this movie does that the first one did really well are the characters and the dynamics that all the actors have with each other. Jessica Rothe once again plays Tree, and she really is talented. I haven't seen her in anything else besides the first Happy Death Day. Apparently she was one of the roommates in La La Land. I don't remember her in that movie, but she has a lot of charisma, she's charming, and there are just a lot of cute moments between all these characters. And I also really like that they take some minor characters from the first movie and give them a little more to do. Like the roommate that keeps barging into the dorm room, he gets a little more to do. In fact, the first 10 minutes of the movie seems like it's going to be his story before they switch over to her story. And they even give one of Tree's sorority sisters more to do. The one that was in charge of the sorority house, the bossy one, the ditzy one. They give her more to do to the point where I actually kind of like the character. And the reason for that is something that you'll have to see the movie to find out. But It has its cute moments, and it actually has a lot of dramatic moments here and there. That's one of the things that surprised me about the first Happy Death Day was, for being a horror comedy, it had some real heartfelt emotional moments, and this movie excels at that even more. So overall, I don't think this is as good as the first Happy Death Day, and outside of the fact that it's not as clever, they do repeat a lot of stuff from the first movie, like the big montage of Tree dying, which I'll admit they get creative with, very creative with, and it also runs for a little too long. There's a point in the movie where you think it's all wrapped up, the movie's about to end, and then something happens, another conflict happens to where the movie keeps going for a little longer, and I feel like it was probably 10 minutes too long, but still, despite my criticisms, I'd still say it's a good movie, just not great. This is the same rating that I gave the first Happy Death Day, but I'm a little more optimistic about that one. This one, it's still good. It's a perfect date movie, I gotta say, because it's not really a horror movie at all. So if you have a significant other that doesn't like seeing horror movies, you can convince them that this isn't a horror movie, and I think you two will have a fun time. I know Valentine's Day was a while ago, but still, you want to be in the mood for a date night at the movies. This isn't a bad movie to go see. And that's my review for Happy Death Day to You. Now I want to hear what you guys have to say. If you've seen the movie, what did you think? Do you like this better than the first Happy Death Day? Do you think the first one's better? Or do you not like these movies? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed this review. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and of course leave a comment. Don't forget to support my Patreon page, follow me on social media, and until next time, this is the Real Mr. Robinson telling you, there is only one.